The bitter January wind howled through the Colorado Territory as Deanna Lockhart clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. She had lost everything: her family, her home, her hope, and now found herself stranded at the Silverton railway station with nothing but a small carpet bag and the crushing weight of despair. Tears streamed down her wind-chapped face as she sat hunched on the icy steps, watching the last train of the day disappear into the gathering darkness of 1876. Diana had been on the run for weeks, fleeing from a past that haunted her every waking moment. At 22, she had already endured more heartache than most people experienced in a lifetime. The silver mining boom had brought her father to Colorado 2 years prior, but the promise of fortune had turned to tragedy when a cave-in claimed his life. Her mother had succumbed to consumption shortly after, leaving Diana alone with mounting debts and desperate suitors who saw her only as property to be claimed. When banker Theodore Hargrove had threatened to take her family's modest home unless she agreed to marry him, Diana had gathered what little she could carry and fled in the night. Now, her meager funds exhausted and the bitter cold seeping into her bones, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Ain't no more trains coming tonight, miss," called the station master as he prepared to lock up for the evening. "Inn's full up with the mining convention in town." "You got somewhere to go?" Diana wiped her tears with the back of her gloved hand. "No, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. The station master frowned, looking uncomfortable. "Can't have you staying here. Station closes in 5 minutes. Diana nodded weakly, though she had no idea where she would go. As the station master disappeared back inside, she buried her face in her hands and allowed fresh tears to fall. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and she knew that without shelter, she might not survive the night. "You're already home," came a deep, gentle voice from above her. Diana looked up with a start to find a tall figure standing before her. The man wore a battered Stetson pulled low against the wind, but she could make out kind eyes set in a weathered face. A thick sheepskin coat hung from broad shoulders, and leather chaps covered his denim pants. He was unmistakably a cowboy, though not the rough sort she'd seen drinking and brawling in saloons. "Pardon me," she asked, hastily wiping away her tears. "I said you're already home," he repeated, his voice low and steady. "Or you could be if you're willing. My name's Damon Nash. I manage the Silverhoof Ranch just outside town. Mrs. Abernathy, the widow who owns the place, sent me to meet her niece on the evening train." He glanced at the now empty tracks, but it appears she wasn't on it. Diana stared at him, confusion mingling with the faintest flicker of hope. "Mrs. Abernathy's getting on in years and she needs help around the place," Damon continued. "Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. The position comes with room and board." He paused, studying her face. "You look like you could use both right about now." Diana hesitated. She'd learned to be wary of seemingly generous offers from men, but the alternative was a night in the freezing cold. And there was something about this man's eyes, steady, clear, without the predatory gleam she'd grown to recognize and fear. "I don't know you're Mrs. Abernathy," she admitted. Damon nodded. "And she don't know you, but she's a good Christian woman who believes in helping those in need. She'd rather the room not sit empty when someone could use it." He extended a gloved hand. "At least come get warm and have a hot meal. If you don't like it there, I'll bring you back to town in the morning." Diana took a deep breath and made her decision. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. "Thank you, Mr. Nash. I'm Diana Lockhart. Pleased to meet you, Miss Lockhart." He picked up her carpetbag with ease. "My wagon's just around the corner. Let's get you out of this cold." The wagon ride to Silverhoof Ranch was largely silent. save for the creaking of wooden wheels and the steady clop of hooves against the hard, packed snow. Damon had wrapped Deanna in a thick woolen blanket, but still she shivered as they left the small mining town behind and ventured into the darkness of the open countryside. Not much farther now, Damon assured her as they crested a hill. You can see the lanterns just ahead. Deanna peered through the darkness to see warm, golden light glowing in the distance. As they drew closer, the shadowy outline of a sprawling ranch house emerged from the night. Silverhoof Ranch was larger than Deanna had expected, a two-story main house built of sturdy timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a large barn stood a short distance away. Despite the howling wind, the place had an air of solidity about it, as if it had weathered countless storms and stood ready to face 1,000 more. Damon pulled the wagon to a stop before the house and jumped down, extending a hand to help Deanna. Her legs felt stiff and numb from the cold as she stepped onto the ground. "Come on," he said, leading her up the porch steps. "Mrs. Abernathy will have kept supper warm." The door opened before they reached it, spilling golden lamplight onto the porch. A small, wiry woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene before her. "That ain't my niece Caroline," she declared, eyeing Deanna suspiciously. "No, madam," Damon agreed. "Caroline wasn't on the train. This is Miss Deanna Lockhart. Found her stranded at the station with nowhere to go on this cold night." Mrs. Abernathy's gaze softened slightly as she looked Deanna over, noting her red-rimmed eyes and trembling frame. After a moment of consideration, she stepped aside. "Well, don't just stand there letting all the heat out. Come in, girl, come in." Deanna stepped into the warmth of the house, feeling sensation gradually return to her frozen extremities as Damon followed with her carpet bag. The entryway opened into a spacious living area dominated by a large stone fireplace where logs crackled and popped. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Abernathy," Deanna said, her voice still shaky from the cold. "Mr. Nash explained you were expecting your niece." "HMPH," the older woman snorted. "That girl's been promising to visit for 3 years now." "I should have known better than to believe she'd actually come." She gestured toward the fire. "Warm yourself while I fetch you some soup. You look half frozen." Deanna gratefully moved toward the hearth, extending her hands toward the flames. The house was comfortably furnished with well-worn but quality pieces: a horsehair sofa, several armchairs, a polished oak table with matching chairs, and bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. "I'll go see to the horses," Damon said, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly flattened from the hat, and in the firelight, Deanna could see that his eyes were a deep green. "Then I'll head back to my cabin." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy called from what Deanna presumed was the kitchen. "It's too cold and late for that. You'll stay in the spare room tonight." Damon didn't argue, simply nodding as he headed back outside to tend to the team. Deanna stood awkwardly by the fire, unsure of her place in this unexpected situation. Mrs. Abernathy returned carrying a steaming bowl of beef stew and a thick slice of bread. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the table. "Eat while it's hot." Deanna obeyed, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. The stew was rich and flavorful, the bread still warm from the oven. Mrs. Abernathy sat across from her, hands folded on the table, watching as Deanna ate. "So," the older woman said finally, "what's your story, girl? What brings you to Silverton alone with winter setting in?" Deanna hesitated, spoon halfway to her mouth. She wasn't ready to share everything, but she owed this woman some explanation. "My parents are gone," she said simply. "Father died in the mines, mother from consumption shortly after. I had to leave our home in Denver. Mrs. Abernathy studied her face. Running from something or someone, Diana looked down at her bowl. "Yes, madam." To her surprise, the older woman merely nodded, figured as much. "Not my business what you're running from unless it's the law." "No," Diana assured her quickly. "Nothing like that." "Good. That's all I need to know for now." Mrs. Abernathy rose from her chair as Damon returned, stomping snow from his boots at the door. "Miss Lockhart, I've got a room prepared upstairs was meant for Caroline, but you're welcome to it tonight. We can talk more in the morning about what happens next." Damon hung his coat and hat on a peg by the door. "Mrs. Abernathy runs the finest cattle operation in the county," he told Diana. "Been doing it solo since Mr. Abernathy passed 8 years ago." The older woman waved away his praise. "Couldn't do it without a good foreman. Damon here's been managing things for 5 years now, ever since he drifted in looking for work." She fixed Diana with a penetrating gaze. "I've got no children of my own. This ranch is my life. I'm getting too old to keep up with the house and the accounts while supervising the cattle operation. That's why I asked Caroline to come." Diana felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "I'm good with figures, madam. My father taught me. And I can cook and clean." "We'll see," Mrs. Abernathy replied, but Diana thought she detected a hint of approval in the woman's tone. "For now, finish your supper. Then I'll show you to your room." That night, lying in a surprisingly comfortable bed under warm quilts, Diana stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind howling outside. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Whether that feeling would last beyond the morning, she couldn't say, but for now it was enough. She thought of Damon Nash's words at the station. "You're already home." Perhaps, if she was very fortunate, they might prove true. Morning came with golden sunlight streaming through lace curtains, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. Diana dressed quickly in her plainest day dress, ran a brush through her long chestnut hair, and pinned it into a simple bun before making her way downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy at the stove, and Damon seated at a small table by the window, a steaming mug of coffee before him. Both looked up as she entered. "Good morning," Diana said tentatively. "Sleep well?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, turning a slice of bacon in the pan. "Yes, madam, better than I have in weeks." "Good, sit down and have some breakfast, then we'll talk." Diana took a seat across from Damon, who offered her a small smile. "Morning, Miss Lockhart, Mr. Nash." Mrs. Abernathy placed plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits before them, then joined them at the table with her own plate. After a brief blessing, they began to eat. "Now then, Mrs. Abernathy said once they'd made progress on their breakfast, "I've been thinking about our situation. My niece clearly isn't coming, and I do need help around here. Miss Lockhart, if you're interested in staying on, I can offer you room and board plus a small wage." Diana nearly choked on her coffee. "You do that? You hardly know me." "I'm a good judge of character," the older woman replied. "Besides, Damon here vouches for you, and I trust his judgment." Diana glanced at Damon, who seemed suddenly interested in his eggs. "I didn't say anything," he mumbled. "You didn't have to," Mrs. Abernathy retorted. "I saw your face when you brought her in. You wouldn't have brought just anyone to my door." A faint blush colored Damon's tanned cheeks. "She needed help," he said simply. Mrs. Abernathy turned back to Diana. "The work won't be easy. This is a working ranch, not a leisure resort. I need help with the cooking, cleaning, and bookkeeping. Sometimes you'll need to pitch in with other chores as well, gardening in the spring and summer, preserving in the fall. You'll have Sundays off and one afternoon a week for yourself." "That sounds more than fair," Diana said eagerly. "There's one more thing." Mrs. Abernathy's expression grew serious. "I don't know what or who you're running from, and I won't pry, but trouble has a way of following folks. If staying here puts my ranch or my people in danger, you'll need to move on. Is that clear?" Deanna nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam, I understand completely." "Good." The older woman's face relaxed into something almost like a smile. "Then welcome to Silverhoof Ranch. After breakfast, Mrs. Abernathy gave Deanna a tour of the house, a generous kitchen with a pantry, the comfortable living area she'd seen the night before, a small study filled with ledgers and correspondence, 4 bedrooms upstairs, and a bathroom with a proper copper tub that could be filled with heated water from the kitchen stove. "This place has been my home for 30 years, Mrs. Abernathy explained as they finished the tour. "Walter, that was my husband, built it with his own hands, adding on as the ranch prospered. Started with just the kitchen and 1 bedroom, if you can believe it." "It's beautiful," Deanna said sincerely. "It's practical," Mrs. Abernathy corrected, though she looked pleased. "Now let me show you what needs doing." The morning passed in a flurry of activity as Deanna helped with laundry, learned where various supplies were kept, and was introduced to the ranch's ledger system. By midday, her head was swimming with information, but she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in months. When they broke for a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold beef, Damon joined them, bringing with him the sharp, clean scent of winter air. "How goes the cattle?" Mrs. Abernathy asked as he removed his coat and hat. "Good as can be expected with the cold. That new windbreak we built in the south pasture is helping." He nodded to Deanna. "How are you settling in, Miss Lockhart?" "Please call me Deanna," she replied. "And I'm settling in well, I think. Mrs. Abernathy is a thorough teacher." "That she is," he agreed with a smile. "And you should call me Damon. Mr. Nash makes me feel like I'm in trouble." Mrs. Abernathy snorted. "You usually are." But there was fondness in her tone as she placed a plate before him. After lunch, Damon returned to his duties and Mrs. Abernathy continued Deanna's orientation. By the time evening fell, Diana's muscles ached from unaccustomed work. But it was a satisfying ache, the kind that came from productivity rather than fear and flight. As they sat down to supper, a hearty stew that Diana had helped prepare, Damon arrived with another man, whom he introduced as Patrick O'Malley, one of the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse with 3 others. "Miss Lockhart is joining us as housekeeper and assistant," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "She'll be handling the accounts as well." Patrick, a burly man with red hair and a beard to match, tipped his hat. "Pleasure, miss. Good to have another pair of hands around here." The meal was filled with talk of ranch business, cattle prices, a fence that needed mending, plans for the spring calving season. Deanna listened attentively, gradually understanding that Silverhoof Ranch, while not the largest in the territory, was well respected for the quality of its stock and the fair treatment of its workers. After supper, Patrick returned to the bunkhouse, and Deanna helped Mrs. Abernathy with the dishes while Damon sat at the table reviewing supply lists. "Tomorrow I'll need to go into town for supplies," he said, looking up from his papers. "Is there anything either of you need?" Mrs. Abernathy thought for a moment. "Yes, we're low on coffee and sugar." "And see if the mercantile has any new fabric, and Deanna will need some proper work dresses if she's going to be here through the seasons." Deanna started to protest that she couldn't accept such generosity, but Mrs. Abernathy silenced her with a look. "Consider it part of your wages. Can't have you working in those city clothes." "I'll add it to the list," Damon said, making a note. He glanced at Deanna. "Would you like to come along? Might do you good to see Silverton in daylight." Deanna hesitated, remembering her hasty departure from the station the previous evening. "I'm not sure that's wise," she said carefully. Understanding flashed in Damon's eyes. "Town's busy with the mining convention," he said. No one will pay much attention to a new face. Besides, might be good for folks to see you with me and know you're working at Silverhoof. Puts you under Mrs. Abernathy's protection, which counts for something around here. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Damon's right. Best to establish yourself as part of the ranch straight away. Cuts down on gossip. Put that way, it made sense. All right, Deanna agreed. Thank you. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the sun glinting off snow-covered mountains that surrounded the valley where Silverhoof Ranch nestled. After breakfast, Deanna bundled up in her coat and a warm shawl borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy, then joined Damon in the wagon for the journey to town. In daylight, she could appreciate the beauty of the ranch and its surroundings. The main house sat on a gentle rise, overlooking pastures that stretched to the base of towering mountains. A creek, partially frozen now in winter, curved through the property, providing water for livestock and the household. Several outbuildings clustered near the main house: a barn, stables, a smokehouse, and a bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. "It's beautiful," Deanna said as Damon guided the team of horses down the long drive toward the main road. "It is," he agreed. "Mrs. Abernathy and her husband chose well when they settled here. Good water, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms, and close enough to town to get supplies but far enough to have peace." The road to Silverton followed the winding creek, occasionally crossing it on sturdy wooden bridges. As they traveled, Damon pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area: the old prospector who lived in a cabin near the bend in the creek, the stand of aspen trees where a mother bear and cubs could often be seen in summer, the rocky outcropping where mountain sheep gathered. "How long have you been in Colorado?" Deanna asked, curious about her taciturn companion. "Going on 6 years now," he replied. "Came west after the war." "You fought in the war between the states," he nodded, his expression growing distant. "Union Army." "Enlisted when I was 18, served 3 years." He didn't elaborate, and Deanna didn't press. "And you've been at Silverhoof for 5 of those years?" "Yes. Drifted around that first year, working odd jobs on ranches and in mines. Then found my way to Silverton and met Walter Abernathy. He hired me as a hand, and when he passed 2 years later, Mrs. Abernathy asked me to stay on as foreman." "She thinks highly of you," Deanna observed. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "She's a fair woman who doesn't suffer fools. I respect that." He glanced at Deanna. "What about you? You mentioned Denver." Deanna nodded, deciding how much to share. "Yes, I was born there. Father worked as an accountant for a shipping company until the silver rush lured him to the mines. We moved to Idaho Springs when I was 20. "And your mother?" "She was a schoolteacher before she married. Taught me at home mostly." Deanna looked down at her gloved hands. "After Father died, she tried to keep our home going, but the consumption took her quickly." "I'm sorry," Damon said quietly. "Losing both parents is a hard thing." Deanna merely nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves on the packed snow. As they approached Silverton, Deanna felt anxiety begin to build in her chest. What if Theodore had somehow tracked her here? But she reminded herself that she'd been careful to cover her tracks, changing trains several times and using a different name when purchasing tickets. Silverton in daylight was a bustling frontier town, despite the winter weather. The silver mines in the surrounding mountains had brought prosperity and growth, evident in the substantial buildings that lined the main street. The mining convention had drawn additional visitors, and the sidewalks were crowded with a mix of miners, businessmen, and locals going about their daily affairs. Damon guided the wagon to the Mercantile, a large 2-story building with a wide porch across the front. "We'll start here," he said, setting the brake and jumping down. He came around to help Deanna descend, his strong hands at her waist steadying her as she stepped down onto the snowy ground. Inside, the mercantile was warm and aromatic with the scents of coffee, leather, tobacco, and spices. Shelves lined the walls, filled with everything from canned goods to tools to clothing. A pot-bellied stove in the center provided heat, with several chairs arranged nearby where old-timers often gathered to exchange news and stories. Damon Nash called the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Good to see you. How's Mrs. Abernathy keeping?" "Well enough, Mr. Peterson. Got a list for you." He handed over Mrs. Abernathy's supply list, then turned to introduce Deanna. "This is Miss Deanna Lockhart, new housekeeper at Silverhoof. Miss Lockhart, this is Harold Peterson, owner of Silverton Mercantile and purveyor of the finest gossip in 3 counties. Mr. Peterson laughed good-naturedly. "Can't run a mercantile without knowing what's what." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lockhart." He looked her over with friendly curiosity. "You're the young lady who arrived on yesterday's train. Word travels fast," he added with a wink. "Yes," Deanna replied, deciding simplicity was best. "I was fortunate to meet Mr. Nash at the station." "Indeed you were. No better man in the territory," Peterson declared, turning his attention to the list. "Now let's see what you need today." As Peterson gathered their supplies, Deanna browsed the store, examining the fabric selection as Mrs. Abernathy had suggested. She selected practical cotton in blue and brown, suitable for work dresses, and was examining a bolt of calico when the bell over the door jingled. "Sheriff Morgan." "What brings you by?" Peterson called out in greeting. Diana tensed, instinctively moving behind a display of canned goods. She peered around cautiously to see a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest hanging his coat by the door. "Just checking in," the sheriff replied. "Any trouble with the mining crowd?" "Nothing worth bothering you about. Bit more noise at the saloon, but that's to be expected." The sheriff nodded, then noticed Damon. "Nash, good to see you. How's things out at Silverhoof?" "Can't complain," Damon replied, moving to stand near Deanna as if sensing her discomfort. "Sheriff, this is Miss Lockhart, new housekeeper at the ranch." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Madam, welcome to Silverton." "Thank you," Deanna murmured, forcing herself to meet his gaze steadily despite her racing heart. There was no recognition in his eyes, which was a relief. Whatever inquiries Theodore might have made hadn't reached this remote mining town. The sheriff turned back to Peterson, discussing recent arrivals on the train and any strangers in town, while Damon guided Diana toward the fabric counter. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Looked like you saw a ghost when the sheriff walked in." Deanna shook her head slightly. "Just startled, that's all." Damon didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. "Let's finish up here, then head to the feed store. After that, we can get some lunch at the hotel dining room if you're hungry." By the time they'd completed their errands and enjoyed a simple but satisfying meal at the Silver Bell Hotel, Diana had begun to relax. Silverton was a world away from Denver, and with each person Damon introduced her to, she felt more established in her new identity as Silverhoof's housekeeper. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon for the return journey, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A group of miners had spilled out of a saloon, their voices raised in anger. "Stay here," Damon instructed, helping Diana onto the wagon seat. "I'll see what's happening." Before he could move away, the altercation escalated. 2 men were grappling with each other, while others formed a circle around them, shouting encouragement. Sheriff Morgan appeared from the direction of his office, pushing through the crowd to break up the fight. "Just a disagreement over a card game," Damon said, returning to the wagon. Sheriff's handling it. Let's head back before the weather turns." As they drove out of town, Deanna felt the tension in her shoulders ease. She'd survived her first public appearance in Silverton without incident. Perhaps, just perhaps, she'd found a safe haven after all. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Deanna rose early each morning to help Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast for the hands, then spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually taking over management of the household accounts. She discovered that Mrs. Abernathy, for all her gruff exterior, was a fair employer and an excellent teacher, patient with Diana's occasional mistakes and generous with praise when deserved. February brought heavy snows that kept the ranch relatively isolated, but Diana found she didn't mind. The cozy evenings spent in the living room, with Mrs. Abernathy knitting by the fire while Damon read aloud from one of Walter's old books, became the highlight of her days. Damon remained something of a mystery to her. Reserved by nature, he spoke little of his past beyond the basic facts he'd already shared. Yet Deanna often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his green eyes thoughtful. During their occasional conversations while she helped with barn chores, or when he assisted her with carrying heavy buckets of water for laundry, she glimpsed a keen intelligence and dry wit beneath his quiet exterior. As February gave way to March, bringing the first hints of spring to the mountains, Deanna began to feel truly at home at Silverhoof. Her new dresses were completed, practical garments suitable for her work but made with care. Mrs. Abernathy had even insisted on ordering some prettier fabric from the mercantile's catalog for a Sunday dress, declaring that every young woman needs something nice for church and socials. It was on a mild March Sunday, as they returned from the small church in Silverton, that Mrs. Abernathy made an announcement. "The spring social is in 2 weeks," she said as Damon helped her down from the wagon. "First big gathering after winter. The whole county turns out for it." Deanna had heard about the event from some of the women at church, a celebration held when the worst of winter had passed, with dancing, food, and much-needed socializing after the isolated winter months. "You'll both attend, of course," Mrs. Abernathy continued. "Deanna, that new dress should be finished just in time." Deanna hesitated. "I'm not much for dances," she said carefully. "Nonsense. Young people should dance while they can. These old bones of mine are past such foolishness, but you and Damon will represent Silverhoof." Damon looked no more enthusiastic than Deanna felt. "Mrs. Abernathy, I haven't danced since before the war." "Then it's high time you remembered how," the older woman replied firmly. "I'll hear no arguments from either of you. The social is important for the ranch business gets discussed. Arrangements for cattle drives are made. You need to be there." That evening, as Deanna prepared for bed, she found herself torn between anxiety and a surprising flutter of anticipation at the thought of attending the dance with Damon. She'd been careful to maintain a proper distance from him, despite their daily interactions, aware that her position at the ranch depended on her reputation. But sometimes, when their hands accidentally touched or when she caught him looking at her with that intense gaze, she felt something stir within her that she'd never experienced before. Shaking her head at her foolishness, Deanna climbed into bed. Damon Nash was her employer's foreman, nothing more. She couldn't afford to indulge in romantic fancies, not when she was still looking over her shoulder, fearing Theodore's pursuit. The next 2 weeks passed quickly as preparations for the social occupied much of the ranch's attention, alongside the regular spring tasks. Deanna finished her new dress, a becoming garment of deep blue calico with white lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly when Deanna tried it on. "You clean up nicely, girl," she said with a rare smile. Might have to beat the young men off with a stick. Deanna blushed. I doubt that very much. The day of the social arrived clear and mild, with a hint of green beginning to show in the meadows. After the morning chores were completed, Mrs. Abernathy shooed Deanna upstairs to prepare, insisting that she take the time to do her hair properly and rest before the evening's festivities. Damon will drive you in the buggy, she instructed. No sense taking the wagon for just the two of you. Patrick and the other boys will ride in separately. Deanna spent more time than usual on her appearance, washing her hair with the lavender-scented soap Mrs. Abernathy had ordered specially from the mercantile, then carefully arranging it in a becoming style with soft curls framing her face. The new dress fit perfectly, its color bringing out the blue in her eyes. When she descended the stairs, Damon was waiting in the living room, dressed in his best clothes, clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His usually unruly dark hair was neatly combed and he'd trimmed his beard. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "You look beautiful, Deanna," he said finally, his voice low. "Thank you," she replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Abernathy, observing from her armchair, made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "Well, don't just stand there staring at each other. You'll be late if you don't get going." The drive to town was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Deanna was acutely aware of Damon beside her, his clean soap scent mingling with the leather of his best jacket. The evening air was cool but not cold, carrying the promise of the spring to come. Silverton's town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and wildflowers, the first of the season, decorating every available surface. A small band occupied one corner, tuning their instruments, while long tables along the walls held an impressive array of food brought by families from throughout the county. "Damon, Deanna, over here," called a familiar voice as they entered. Mr. Peterson from the mercantile waved to them from near the punch bowl, where he stood with his wife, a plump, cheerful woman Deanna had met at church. As Damon guided her through the crowded room with a gentle hand at the small of her back, Deanna was surprised by how many people greeted them by name. In just a few short months, it seemed she'd become known as part of Silverhoof Ranch, accepted into the community without question. The evening progressed pleasantly, with Deanna sampling the various dishes and engaging in conversation with neighbors. She noticed Damon speaking with several cattlemen, their expressions serious as they discussed business matters, just as Mrs. Abernathy had predicted. When the band began to play in earnest, couples moved to the center of the room. Deanna watched, content to observe from the sidelines until Damon appeared beside her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, offering his hand. Deanna hesitated. "I thought you were out of practice." A small smile played at his lips. "I am, but I reckon we can be rusty together." She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as they began to move to the music. Despite his claim of being out of practice, Damon proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps of the waltz. "You're better at this than you let on," Deanna accused lightly. "Mrs. Abernathy's been giving me refresher lessons all week," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Said she wouldn't have Silverhoof embarrassed by a foreman who couldn't dance properly." Deanna laughed, the sound surprising her. How long had it been since she'd laughed freely? "She's a remarkable woman, that she is." Damon's eyes never left her face as they turned around the floor. "She thinks highly of you, you know, says you've been a godsend. I'm the one who should be grateful. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night." His expression grew serious. Deanna, I've never asked about what brought you to that station, and I won't pry now. But I want you to know that you're safe at Silverhoof. Whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone anymore. Deanna felt tears prick at her eyes at his quiet sincerity. Thank you, she whispered. The music ended, and another couple bumped into them, breaking the moment. Deanna stepped back, feeling suddenly vulnerable. Damon seemed to sense her discomfort and guided her toward the refreshment table. Punch, he offered. Yes, thank you. As Damon moved away to fetch their drinks, Deanna took a moment to compose herself. She hadn't expected the evening to affect her so strongly, nor had she anticipated the growing feelings she harbored for the quiet foreman. Deanna Lockhart, is that you? The voice froze her blood. Slowly, Deanna turned to face a woman perhaps 5 years her senior, elegantly dressed in the latest fashion from Denver. It took a moment for recognition to dawn. Vivian Hargrove, Deanna said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Vivian was Theodore's sister-in-law, married to his older brother James. It is you, Vivian exclaimed. My goodness, what are you doing all the way out here in Silverton? Theodore has been beside himself looking for you. Diana fought to maintain her composure. I'm sure he has, she said coolly. How did you come to be here, Vivian? James has mining investments in the area. We're here for the convention and decided to stay for the social. Vivian's eyes gleamed with curiosity. But you haven't answered my question. Theodore said you disappeared without a word, just when he was about to propose. Diana's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Theodore knows perfectly well why I left, she said, her voice low but firm. He threatened to take my home if I didn't marry him. Vivian had the grace to look uncomfortable. Well, I'm sure there was some misunderstanding. In any case, you must let him know you're all right. He's been so worried. Is he here? Deanna asked, glancing around the room in alarm. No, he returned to Denver last week, but James is here somewhere. Vivian looked over Deanna's shoulder and smiled. Ah, and who is this handsome gentleman? Deanna turned to see Damon approaching with 2 cups of punch. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the concern in his eyes. Damon Nash, foreman of Silverhoof Ranch, he introduced himself, handing a cup to Deanna. His free hand moved to the small of her back in a subtle gesture of support. Vivian Hargrove, Vivian replied with a practiced smile. An old friend of Diana's from Denver, acquaintance, Deanna corrected. Mrs. Hargrove is married to the brother of a man I knew in Denver, understanding flashed in Damon's eyes. I see. Well, Mrs. Hargrove, I'm afraid I need to steal Deanna away. Mrs. Abernathy has entrusted us with delivering her regards to several people this evening, and we still have rounds to make. Before Vivian could protest, Damon had guided Deanna through the crowd toward a quieter corner of the hall. Are you all right? He asked once they were out of earshot. Deanna took a deep breath. I will be, but we should leave soon. If Vivian is here, her husband James can't be far behind, and he'll certainly write to Theodore. Damon nodded. We'll go as soon as you're ready. Do you want to leave now? Diana considered. Fleeing immediately would only confirm Vivian's suspicions and give her more to report. No, she decided. Let's stay a little longer, be seen enjoying ourselves. It will seem less like I'm running again. Damon studied her face. You're sure? Yes, she managed a small smile. Perhaps another dance. They returned to the dance floor, and Deanna did her best to appear carefree as they moved through a lively reel. All the while, she was acutely aware of Vivian watching them from across the room, occasionally whispering to a tall, distinguished-looking man who could only be James Hargrove. After 2 more dances and some deliberate conversation with several prominent townspeople, Deanna nodded to Damon. I think we can go now. The drive back to the ranch was tense, with Deanna explaining her history with Theodore Hargrove in halting sentences. Damon listened without interruption, as she described how the banker had manipulated her family's debts after her father's death, positioning himself as her only option. He made it very clear, Deanna concluded, that if I didn't agree to marry him, he would foreclose on our home and see to it that no one in Denver would hire me. When my mother's cousin in Idaho Springs wrote that she could take me in, I gathered what I could carry and left in the night. But you didn't go to Idaho Springs, Damon observed. No, I learned that Theodore had connections there as well, so I kept moving, using what little money I had for train tickets until I ended up in Silverton. She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. I had nowhere else to go. Damon was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You do now," he said firmly. "Silverhoof is your home for as long as you want it to be, and this Theodore, he has no legal claim on you, correct? None whatsoever. Then if he comes looking, he'll find himself unwelcome. Mrs. Abernathy has considerable influence in this county, and the ranch hands are loyal. Not to mention Sheriff Morgan is a fair man who won't take kindly to harassment." Deanna felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. When they reached the ranch, Damon helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the moonlight, his expression was solemn. "Diana, I want you to know," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore." She gazed up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "I'm beginning to believe that," she said softly. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might kiss her. Then a light appeared in the doorway as Mrs. Abernathy opened the front door. "About time you two got back," she called. "Come inside and tell me all about the social." The moment broken, Deanna stepped back. But as they walked toward the house, Damon's hand brushed against hers in a gesture that felt deliberately reassuring. The next morning, Deanna woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Abernathy and Damon in serious conversation. "Morning," Mrs. Abernathy greeted her. "Damon was just telling me about your encounter last night." Deanna nodded, unsurprised that Damon had informed their employer. "I'm sorry for any trouble this might bring to Silverhoof." "Nonsense," the older woman replied briskly. "You've done nothing wrong. This Theodore character sounds like a scoundrel who needs to be put in his place. Mrs. Abernathy thinks we should be prepared," Damon explained. "If the Hargroves write to Theodore, he could show up here. And if he does," Mrs. Abernathy declared, "he'll find himself facing the business end of Walter's shotgun. No one threatens a member of my household." Despite her anxiety, Deanna felt warmed by the older woman's fierce protectiveness. "I hope it won't come to that." "So do I," Damon agreed. "But it's best to be ready. I've told the hands to keep an eye out for strangers asking about you." The days that followed were tense, with Deanna jumping at every sound of approaching horses. But as 1 week stretched into 2 with no sign of Theodore, she began to hope that perhaps the Hargroves had not reported her presence in Silverton after all. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing new calves to the herd and fresh growth to the pastures. Deanna found herself busier than ever, helping with the garden planting and assisting Mrs. Abernathy with the increased cooking needed to feed the hands during the busy calving season. The work was exhausting but satisfying, and she fell into bed, each night too tired to worry about Theodore Hargrove. Her relationship with Damon had shifted subtly since the night of the social. There was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of deeper feelings that neither seemed quite ready to voice. Occasionally, their hands would touch as they worked side by side, or their eyes would meet across the supper table, and Diana would feel a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. One evening in late April, as Diana sat on the porch enjoying the twilight after a long day of work, Damon joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might like some," he said, offering her one. "Thank you." She accepted the cup gratefully, breathing in the rich aroma. Damon settled into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Spring roundup starts next week," Damon commented finally. "I'll be away with the hands for a few days, checking the herd in the far pastures." Diana nodded. Mrs. Abernathy had explained the ranch's seasonal rhythms to her months ago. "Be careful," she said. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned there have been reports of mountain lions in the high pastures." "Always am." He glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. "Will you miss me?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Yes," she admitted after a moment. "I will." Something in his expression softened. "Good, because I'll be missing you something fierce." Diana's heart quickened at his words. Damon, before she could continue, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted. Both turned toward the drive, where a lone rider was approaching at a steady pace. Damon stood, his posture alert. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the steps as the rider came into view. It was Patrick O'Malley returning from an errand in town. He dismounted quickly, his expression troubled as he approached the porch. "Damon, Miss Diana," he greeted them. "Got some news from town. Thought you should know straight away." "What is it?" Damon asked. Patrick glanced at Diana. "There's a man asking questions about Miss Diana at the hotel. Well-dressed fellow from Denver, according to Mr. Henderson at the livery. Said he's looking for his fiancée who ran off." Diana's blood ran cold. "Theodore," she whispered. Damon's expression hardened. "Did this man give his name?" Henderson said he called himself Hargrove. "Theodore Hargrove." Diana felt her legs grow weak and she sank back into her chair. "He's found me," she murmured. Damon turned to her, his voice steady and reassuring. "He's found Silverton, not you. Not yet. And he won't get near you, I promise." Patrick nodded firmly. "The boys and I will make sure of that, Miss Diana. No city banker is going to bother you while we're around." "Thank you, Patrick," Damon said. "Go tell Mrs. Abernathy what's happening, then get back to the bunkhouse and brief the others. I want someone keeping watch tonight, just in case." As Patrick headed inside, Damon knelt before Diana, taking her trembling hands in his. "Look at me," he said gently. She raised her eyes to meet his. "You are not alone, do you understand? He has no power here. This is your home now, and we protect our own at Silverhoof." Diana drew a shaky breath, drawing strength from his unwavering gaze and the warmth of his hands around hers. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not just for myself, but for all of you. Theodore is influential, and he's not used to being denied what he wants." "Neither am I," Damon replied, a hint of steel in his voice. "And what I want is for you to be safe and happy here." The front door opened, and Mrs. Abernathy emerged, shotgun in hand. "Well," she said briskly, "so the Denver dandy has shown his face. Let him come. I've been wanting to try out this new shotgun Walter ordered before he passed." Despite her fear, Diana couldn't help a small smile at the older woman's fierce demeanor. "I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me." "Then he'd best behave himself when he comes calling," Mrs. Abernathy replied. She looked at Damon. "Patrick's setting up the watch rotation with the boys. You stay close to the house tomorrow. If this Hargrove fellow shows up, I want you here." Damon nodded. "Yes, madam." That night, Diana slept fitfully, waking at every sound. Dawn found her exhausted but determined not to cower in fear. She dressed in one of her practical work dresses and pinned her hair severely back, as if preparing for battle. Breakfast was a tense affair with Mrs. Abernathy and Damon discussing strategy while Deanna picked at her food. They had just finished when Patrick appeared at the door. "Rider coming up the drive," he announced. "Fancy city clothes and a hired horse from Henderson's livery." Diana's heart pounded as she rose from the table. "It's him," she said quietly. Mrs. Abernathy reached for her shotgun propped beside the door. "Let's greet our visitor properly, then." "Mrs. Abernathy, please," Deanna protested. "No guns," the older woman snorted. "I'm not planning to shoot him unless he gives me cause." But there's nothing like a shotgun to encourage good manners in an unwelcome caller. They assembled on the porch, Deanna in the center, with Damon on one side and Mrs. Abernathy on the other. Patrick stood at the bottom of the steps, arms folded across his broad chest. The other ranch hands had positioned themselves strategically around the yard, their presence a clear message. Theodore Hargrove rode into view on a chestnut gelding, looking every inch the successful Denver banker in his tailored suit and bowler hat. He pulled his mount to a stop at the foot of the porch steps, his eyes fixed on Deanna. "Deanna," he said, his voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern education. "Thank God I've found you. I've been worried sick." Diana lifted her chin. "Hello, Theodore. As you can see, I'm perfectly well." He removed his hat, revealing meticulously groomed brown hair. At 35, Theodore Hargrove was considered handsome in Denver society, with regular features and an air of confidence that many found appealing. Deanna had once thought him charming, before she'd seen behind his polished facade. "My dear, you can't imagine my distress when I found you gone," he continued. "And then to hear from James that he'd seen you in this remote location." He glanced dismissively at the ranch buildings. "It's time to come home now. I've arranged everything." "This is my home," Deanna replied firmly. "I have no intention of returning to Denver, especially not with you." Theodore's pleasant expression faltered slightly. "I understand you were upset about our last conversation. Perhaps I was a bit forceful in expressing my wishes. But surely you can see that I had only your best interests at heart. Threatening to take my home unless I married you was hardly in my best interest," Deanna retorted. Theodore's gaze shifted to Damon and Mrs. Abernathy. "I see these people have poisoned your mind against me. Deanna, be reasonable. What future can you possibly have here, working as a servant?" "She's not a servant," Mrs. Abernathy interjected sharply. "She's my assistant and a valued member of this household." Theodore barely spared her a glance. "Madam, this is between me and my fiancé." "I am not your fiancé," Deanna said, her voice stronger now. "I never agreed to marry you, Theodore. I made that perfectly clear before I left Denver." A flash of anger crossed his face before he controlled it. "You were distraught over your mother's passing, not thinking clearly. I forgive you for that temporary lapse in judgment." He held out his hand. "Come, Deanna. I have a room at the hotel in town. We can be married by the local justice of the peace tomorrow and begin our journey back to civilization." Damon stepped forward, his stance relaxed but vigilant. "Mr. Hargrove, Miss Lockhart has made her wishes clear. She's staying at Silverhoof." Theodore's eyes narrowed as he assessed Damon. "And you are Damon Nash, foreman of Silverhoof Ranch, I see." Theodore's tone was coldly dismissive. "Well, Mr. Nash, this matter doesn't concern you. Deanna is returning to Denver with me where she belongs." "No, I'm not," Deanna said, moving to stand beside Damon. "I've built a new life here, Theodore. A good life with people who care about me, not what I can do for them. I'm not leaving." Theodore's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "Don't be absurd," he snapped. "What can these people offer you compared to what I can provide? A fine home in Denver, servants, social position, happiness," Deanna interrupted. They've given me happiness, Theodore. Something you never could. Anger flashed in his eyes. You ungrateful, he cut himself off, visibly struggling for control. I see I've caught you at a bad time. Perhaps after you've had a chance to think, you'll be more reasonable. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. I've taken a room at the hotel for the week. Here's my card. I expect to hear from you by tomorrow. When no one moved to take the envelope, he tossed it onto the porch steps. Don't test my patience, Deanna. I have considerable influence in this territory. It would be unfortunate if you're new. Friends found themselves facing difficulties. Is that a threat, Mr. Hargrove? Damon asked quietly. Theodore's smile didn't reach his eyes. Merely an observation about the realities of business and politics. Good day to you all. He replaced his hat, turned his horse, and rode back down the drive at a measured pace. As soon as he was out of sight, Diana's knees gave way. Damon caught her before she could fall, guiding her to a chair on the porch. He won't give up, she said shakily. That's not his nature. Neither is it mine, Damon replied. He looked to Mrs. Abernathy. We need to see the sheriff. The older woman nodded. And Judge Wilson, he's an old friend of Walter's, won't take kindly to threats against Silverhoof. Diana looked up at them. Thank you both. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door. Mrs. Abernathy waved away her apology. Girl, trouble finds its way to every door sooner or later. The measure of a home is how it stands against the storm. She picked up Theodore's card from the steps and tore it in half. I'd say Silverhoof stands pretty solid. That afternoon, Damon rode into town to speak with Sheriff Morgan and Judge Wilson, while Deanna remained at the ranch under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Abernathy and the hands. She tried to focus on her usual tasks, but her mind kept returning to Theodore's cold anger and veiled threats. When Damon returned in the evening, his expression was grim but determined. Sheriff Morgan knows about Hargrove now, he reported as they gathered around the kitchen table. He'll keep an eye on him while he's in town, make sure he doesn't cause trouble. Judge Wilson was even more helpful. He says that without a formal engagement or contract, Hargrove has no legal claim on Deanna whatsoever. That's a relief, Deanna said. There's more, Damon continued. I sent a telegraph to a friend in Denver, asking about Hargrove. Seems his bank isn't doing as well as he lets on. There are rumors of financial irregularities, which might explain his determination to marry Deanna. My father's insurance money, Deanna realized. It wasn't much, but it was all we had left after his death. Theodore handled the account at his bank. Mrs. Abernathy frowned. You think he's after the girl's inheritance? It would explain his persistence, Damon replied. Judge Wilson has agreed to meet with Deanna tomorrow to discuss legal protections for her and for Silverhoof, in case Hargrove tries to make good on his threats. Diana slept better that night, comforted by the knowledge that she had allies in her fight against Theodore. The next morning, she rode into town with Damon for her appointment with Judge Wilson, a dignified elderly man who received them in his chambers at the courthouse. Miss Lockhart, he greeted her warmly. Walter Abernathy was one of my dearest friends. Any member of his household is welcome here. The judge listened attentively as Diana explained her history with Theodore, occasionally making notes on a pad before him. And you never signed any documents regarding your father's estate or the insurance money? He asked when she had finished. No, sir. Theodore said he was handling everything as a favor to my family, given our long acquaintance. Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. In that case, Mr. Hargrove has no legal standing whatsoever. However, men like him often rely on intimidation rather than law. He turned to Damon. I understand there were veiled threats against Silverhoof? Yes, sir, Damon confirmed. He implied he had influence that could cause problems for the ranch. Typical bluster, the judge snorted. Augusta Abernathy has more friends in this territory than any Denver banker. But to be safe, I'll draft a formal cease and desist order. If Hargrove continues to harass Miss Lockhart or Silverhoof Ranch, he'll find himself facing legal consequences. As they left the courthouse, Deanna felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. You think it will be enough? She asked Damon. The judge's order, I mean. For a man who values his reputation, it should be, he replied, but we'll stay vigilant nonetheless. He hesitated, then added, Deanna, there's something I've been wanting to say to you before all this happened. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of the tension in his broad shoulders and the earnestness in his green eyes. Yes, before he could continue, a familiar voice interrupted them. Diana, I knew I'd find you in town today. Theodore Hargrove approached from across the street, his expression pleasant but his eyes cold as he noted her companion. I hoped we might speak privately, my dear. Deanna felt Damon stiffen beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. There's nothing to discuss, Theodore. I've just come from Judge Wilson's chambers. He's preparing a legal order forbidding you to contact me or interfere with Silverhoof Ranch in any way. Theodore's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. A small-town judge's order means nothing in Denver, Deanna. Be reasonable. Your position here is temporary at best. What happens when the novelty wears off for your employers? You have no security, no future. She has both, Damon interjected, his voice quiet but firm. Deanna is respected and valued at Silverhoof. She has made a place for herself there that no one can take away, certainly not you. Theodore's gaze shifted to Damon, contempt evident in his expression. Ah, I see how it is. The ranch foreman has developed a tender for his employer's housekeeper. How quaint. He turned back to Deanna. Is that what this is about? You've allowed this, Cowboy, to turn your head with pretty words. I expected better judgment from you, Deanna. Deanna felt her cheeks flush with anger. The only poor judgment I've shown was in ever considering you a friend, Theodore. Damon Nash has more honor and integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body. Theodore's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. You little fool, he hissed. Do you think I'll let you embarrass me this way? Your father owed me. My father owed you nothing, Deanna interrupted. And neither do I. People on the street had begun to take notice of the confrontation. From the corner of her eye, Deanna saw Sheriff Morgan emerge from his office across the way, alerted by the raised voices. Theodore noted the attention they were attracting and struggled to compose himself. This isn't over, Deanna, he said, his voice low. Think carefully about what you're throwing away. My offer won't stand indefinitely. It doesn't need to stand at all, she replied evenly. Goodbye, Theodore. As Theodore stalked away, Sheriff Morgan approached them. Everything all right here? He asked, his hand resting casually on his holster. Yes, Sheriff, Damon replied. Mr. Hargrove was just leaving town, I believe. The sheriff's eyes tracked Theodore's retreating figure. Good. Judge Wilson filled me in on the situation. Miss Lockhart, you let me know if that fellow gives you any more trouble. Thank you, Sheriff, Deanna said gratefully. After a brief conversation with the sheriff, they completed their errands in town and began the journey back to Silverhoof. As the wagon rumbled along the familiar road, Deanna found herself reflecting on Theodore's words about her position at the ranch. Damon, she said hesitantly, do you think Theodore was right about one thing? Is my position at Silverhoof truly secure? He looked at her in surprise. Of course it is. Mrs. Abernathy thinks of you almost as a daughter. Why would you doubt that? Deanna sighed. I suppose because I've learned that nothing in life is certain. When my father died, everything I thought was solid crumbled away. Damon was quiet for a moment, his hand steady on the reins. "Deanna, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been trying to say for weeks now." Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. "What is it?" He guided the horses to the side of the road and brought them to a halt, then turned to face her fully. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you that first night at the station, when you looked up at me with those brave, sad eyes. And every day since then I've fallen a little deeper." Diana's breath caught in her throat. "Damon, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you came to Silverhoof looking for safety, not romance, and I respect that. But I want you to know that whatever happens with Hargrove, whatever you decide about your future, my feelings won't change. You'll always have a home with me if you want it." Tears welled in Deanna's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After everything with Theodore, I was wary of trusting my heart to anyone." "I understand," he said, reaching out to take her hand. "And I'll wait as long as you need. There's no rush." Deanna looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his beloved face. "I don't want to wait," she said with sudden certainty. "Life is too uncertain, as we've both learned. I love you, Damon Nash, and I want a future with you." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss a promise of things to come. When they finally continued their journey to Silverhoof, Deanna felt as though the world had somehow shifted beneath her feet. The ranch buildings came into view, solid and welcoming in the afternoon light, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was truly home at last. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her shrewd gaze taking in their clasped hands and radiant faces as they descended from the wagon. "Well," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "it's about time." Damon chuckled. "Nothing gets past you, does it, Mrs. Abernathy?" "Not on my ranch, it doesn't," she replied with satisfaction. "Come inside, both of you. I've got coffee on, and we need to discuss what to do about that banker fellow." Inside, over steaming cups of coffee, they reported on their meeting with Judge Wilson and the encounter with Theodore in town. "He'll receive the cease and desist order tomorrow," Damon explained. "Judge Wilson is having it delivered to the hotel." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Good. That should put an end to his nonsense." "I hope so," Deanna said, "but I'm not sure. Theodore isn't used to being denied what he wants." "Neither am I," Mrs. Abernathy retorted. "And what I want is for you two to be happy here at Silverhoof without interference from some city dandy with delusions of grandeur." Damon smiled at Deanna across the table. "That's what we want too, Mrs. Abernathy regarded them both with a mixture of affection and exasperation. "Then it's settled. Now I suppose we should discuss wedding plans. No sense in a long engagement at your ages." Deanna nearly choked on her coffee. "Wedding? Well, of course," the older woman replied matter-of-factly. "Unless you two were planning to carry on in sin, which I won't have under my roof." Damon laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the kitchen. "No, madam, no sin intended." He turned to Deanna, his expression growing serious. "Though I haven't properly asked yet." Before Deanna could respond, a commotion outside caught their attention. Patrick burst through the door, his face flushed with exertion. "Rider coming fast," he reported. "Looks like that Hargrove fellow, and he's got a gun." Damon was on his feet instantly. "Stay here," he instructed Deanna, reaching for the rifle kept near the door. "No," she replied, standing as well. "This is my fight too." Mrs. Abernathy was already moving toward her shotgun. "Both of you get out on the porch. I'll cover you from the window." They emerged onto the porch just as Theodore galloped into the yard, his horse lathered from hard riding. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his eyes wild as he pulled his mount to a sharp halt. "Deanna," he shouted, waving a pistol. "You've humiliated me for the last time." Deanna stepped forward, despite Damon's protective hand on her arm. "Theodore, put the gun down. This isn't going to solve anything." "It's too late for talk," he snarled. "I received a telegram from Denver this afternoon. The bank examiners have found discrepancies in the accounts, including your father's insurance money. They're saying I embezzled it, did you?" Deanna asked quietly. Theodore's laugh was brittle. "What does it matter? My reputation is ruined either way. And it's your fault. If you just married me as you were supposed to, none of this would have happened." "That's enough, Hargrove," Damon said, stepping beside Deanna. "Put down the gun and leave. You're only making things worse for yourself." Theodore's hand trembled as he pointed the pistol at them. "I have nothing left to lose," he said, his voice breaking. "Nothing." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Theodore fired wildly, the shot going high and splintering wood from the porch roof. Before he could fire again, a deafening blast came from the window beside the door Mrs. Abernathy's shotgun. The shot was aimed at Theodore's horse, not the man himself, but the frightened animal reared violently, throwing Theodore to the ground. The pistol flew from his hand as he landed hard. The wind knocked from his lungs. In seconds, Damon had crossed the yard and secured the weapon, while Patrick and another hand rushed to restrain the banker. Deanna hurried down the steps to where Theodore lay gasping for breath, his face contorted with rage and pain. "You need help, Theodore," she said gently. "I'm sorry for what's happened to you, but this isn't the way." He looked up at her, and for a brief moment, she saw something like regret in his eyes before the anger returned. "I don't need your pity," he spat. Sheriff Morgan arrived within the hour, summoned by one of the ranch hands who had ridden to town at Mrs. Abernathy's instruction. The sheriff had brought with him a telegram from Denver confirming that Theodore was wanted for questioning regarding financial irregularities at his bank. "Looks like you've got bigger problems than a stubborn ex-fiancé, Hargrove," the sheriff observed as he handcuffed the banker. "Firing a weapon with intent to harm adds to your troubles considerably." As Theodore was led away to face justice in Denver, Deanna felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The past that had haunted her for so long had finally been laid to rest. That evening, as the sun set over Silverhoof Ranch, Damon took Deanna's hand and led her to a quiet spot near the creek, a small rise with a view of the entire valley. "I brought you here for a reason," he said, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk. "This is my favorite place on the ranch. I come here to think, to remember why I love this land." Deanna smiled up at him. "It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you." He took both her hands in his. "Deanna Lockhart, I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. But I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." Damon reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that glinted in the fading light, a simple gold band with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Deanna felt tears of joy spill onto her cheeks. "It's perfect," she whispered. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss tender yet filled with promise. When they finally drew apart, the first stars were appearing in the twilight sky. "We should head back," Damon said reluctantly. "Mrs. Abernathy will be waiting." Hand in hand, they returned to the house, where Mrs. Abernathy was indeed waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face as she spotted the ring on Diana's finger. "Finally made it official, did you?" she asked as they climbed the steps. "Yes, madam," Damon replied with a grin. She said yes, Mrs. Abernathy's eyes were suspiciously bright as she embraced them both. Walter would be so pleased, she said softly. He always wanted this place filled with family. In that moment, Deanna knew that the words Damon had spoken to her on that cold January night at the station had come true in ways she could never have imagined. She was home truly, completely home, surrounded by love and the promise of a future brighter than any she had dared to dream. Deanna and Damon were married on a perfect June morning in 1876, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the mountains standing as silent witnesses. The ceremony took place at Silverhoof Ranch, with Judge Wilson officiating and Mrs. Abernathy proudly serving as Deanna's matron of honor. The entire community turned out to celebrate the union of the quiet foreman and the woman he had found crying on the station steps. As Deanna stood before the flower-adorned arch that Patrick and the Hands had constructed for the occasion, wearing a simple but elegant white dress that Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on ordering from Denver, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had fled Denver in fear and desperation, with no destination in mind and little hope for the future. Yet somehow, fate had guided her to Silverton and to the man now standing before her, his green eyes filled with love as he took her hands in his. I, Damon Alexander Nash, take you, Deanna Marie Lockhart, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his deep voice steady and sure. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. As Deanna repeated her vows, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. When Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, and Damon leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, the cheers of their friends and neighbors seemed to echo off the surrounding mountains. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears of joy. Mrs. Abernathy, watching from her chair of honor, seemed to glow with satisfaction at seeing her beloved ranch vibrant with life and love. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Mrs. Abernathy beckoned the newlyweds to her side. "I have something for you," she said, withdrawing an envelope from her pocket. "A wedding gift." Damon opened it to find a deed inside transferring ownership of the foreman's cabin and 10 acres of Silverhoof land to Damon and Deanna Nash. "Mrs. Abernathy," Deanna gasped, "we can't accept this." "You most certainly can and will," the older woman replied firmly. "I'm not getting any younger, and I want to see Silverhoof's future secured while I'm still here to enjoy it." She looked at Damon. "You've been more than a foreman to me these past years, Damon. You've been the son Walter and I never had." Damon's voice was husky with emotion as he bent to embrace her. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't think this means you're escaping your duties," Mrs. Abernathy added briskly, though her eyes were suspiciously moist. "I expect both of you to continue working just as hard. The only difference is that now you'll have your own place. I'm too old to have newlyweds under my roof." Deanna laughed through her tears, embracing the woman who had become like a mother to her. "We wouldn't have it any other way." That night, after the last guest had departed and the lanterns had been extinguished, Damon led his bride to their cabin, the foreman's quarters that had been Damon's home for the past 5 years, now transformed with Deanna's feminine touches into a cozy nest for the two of them. As he carried her across the threshold, Deanna knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, secure in their love and in the home they had found at Silverhoof Ranch. The years that followed were filled with hard work, joy, and the inevitable sorrows that life brings. The fall after their wedding, Mrs. Abernathy caught a chill that settled in her lungs and nearly claimed her life. Deanna nursed her through the crisis, refusing to leave her side for days on end, and was rewarded by the older woman's slow but steady recovery. "Can't die yet," Mrs. Abernathy had declared when she was finally able to sit up in bed. "Not until I've seen the next generation of Silverhoof." She didn't have to wait long. The following spring, Diana discovered she was expecting their first child. The news was met with jubilation throughout the ranch, with Mrs. Abernathy immediately beginning to knit tiny garments and Patrick organizing the hands to build a cradle from the finest pine. Thomas Walter Nash arrived on a snowy December morning in 1877, his lusty cries announcing to the world that he had his father's strength and his mother's determination. Mrs. Abernathy, serving as midwife alongside the doctor from Silverton, was the first after Damon to hold the red-faced infant. "He'll do," she pronounced with satisfaction. "A fine start to Silverhoof's future." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under Damon's management. New breeding stock improved the herd, and careful stewardship of the land increased the yield of the hay meadows. Diana, balancing motherhood with her duties as assistant to Mrs. Abernathy, found a fulfillment she had never dreamed possible in her previous life. In 1879, Emily Augusta Nash joined the family, her arrival coinciding with one of the most profitable cattle sales in Silverhoof's history. "A lucky child," Mrs. Abernathy declared, delighted to have a namesake. The following years brought both blessings and challenges. A harsh winter in 1880 threatened the herd, requiring round-the-clock vigilance from Damon and the hands to prevent catastrophic losses. A drought in the summer of 1881 tested the ranch's resources, but Damon's foresight in developing additional water sources saw them through with minimal hardship. Through it all, the love between Diana and Damon only deepened, strengthened by the shared experiences of parenthood, hard work, and occasional adversity. Their home expanded as their family grew, with Damon adding rooms to the cabin as needed, always with an eye toward the future. News occasionally reached them from Denver. Theodore Hargrove had been convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Upon his release, he had left Colorado, reportedly heading east to try to rebuild his life. Deanna found that she could think of him now with pity rather than fear a man who had allowed greed and pride to destroy what might have been a respectable life. Mrs. Abernathy, defying the doctor's predictions after her illness, continued to be the heart of Silverhoof well into her 70s. Though she gradually ceded more of the daily management to Damon and Deanna, her sharp mind and sharper tongue remained undiminished. She took particular joy in her role as honorary grandmother to Thomas and Emily, regaling them with stories of the early days of Silverhoof and teaching them the ranch traditions that had been established over decades. In the spring of 1883, Diana discovered she was expecting their third child. By then, Thomas was 5, a sturdy boy who already showed his father's affinity for horses and the land. Emily, at 3, was her grandmother's shadow, absorbing Mrs. Abernathy's wisdom like a sponge. "I hope it's another girl," Mrs. Abernathy declared when Deanna shared the news. "Balance things out." Damon merely smiled and said he'd be happy with either, so long as the baby and Deanna were healthy. But privately, to Deanna, he admitted that he rather hoped for another son, someone to partner with Thomas in the future management of the ranch. As summer turned to fall and Deanna's time drew near, an unexpected letter arrived from Silverton's lawyer, Philip Morgan, the sheriff's younger brother. Mrs. Abernathy had summoned him to the ranch to update her will, and now he requested a formal meeting with the entire family. On a crisp October afternoon, With the aspen trees glowing gold against the evergreen slopes, they gathered in the main house's living room. Mrs. Abernathy sat in her favorite chair, with Diana and Damon on the sofa across from her. Thomas and Emily had been sent to play in the kitchen under the supervision of Sarah, the young woman who now helped with household chores. "I've asked Philip here to explain some changes I've made," Mrs. Abernathy began without preamble. "Figured it was time to put things in proper order." Philip Morgan, a serious young man with spectacles similar to his brother's, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Abernathy has decided to transfer ownership of Silverhoof Ranch to you both, effective immediately." Deanna gasped, her hand going to her rounded belly in shock. "Mrs. Abernathy, no." "We couldn't possibly—" "Hush," the older woman interrupted. "It's already done. The papers are signed." Her expression softened as she looked at their stunned faces. "Walter and I never had children of our own. You two and those young ones are the closest I'll ever come to family. Silverhoof should belong to those who love it and will care for it properly when I'm gone." "You're not going anywhere," Damon said firmly. Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "Maybe not today or tomorrow. But I'm not getting any younger, and I want to see you two running this place officially while I can still enjoy it." She fixed them with a stern look. "Don't think this means I'm retiring. I'll still have plenty to say about how things are done, but the legal ownership should be yours." Philip Morgan explained the details of the arrangement. The ranch and all its assets were now jointly owned by Damon and Deanna, with provisions for inheritance by their children. Mrs. Abernathy retained lifetime rights to her home and a generous income from the ranch's proceeds. When the lawyer had departed, leaving them with the signed documents, Diana moved to kneel beside Mrs. Abernathy's chair, taking the older woman's gnarled hands in hers. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You've given us so much: a home, a family, a future." Mrs. Abernathy's own eyes were suspiciously bright as she squeezed Deanna's hands. "You gave me just as much, girl. When you came to Silverhoof, this old place was just existing, not really living. You and Damon brought it back to life." She looked up at Damon, who stood nearby, still seeming stunned by the development. "Walter would be proud of what you've done here, son. Prouder still of what you'll do in the years to come." That evening, as they prepared for bed in their cabin, Deanna watched Damon as he stared thoughtfully out the window toward the main house, its lights still glowing in the darkness. "Are you all right?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of wonder and responsibility. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted. "Silverhoof has been my home for 7 years, but to own it—" He shook his head. "I never expected this." "Nor did I," Deanna said, leaning against him as his arm encircled her shoulders. "But I think Mrs. Abernathy is right. It feels right somehow, as if this was always meant to be." Damon's hand moved to rest on her belly where their third child grew. "Do you ever think about that night at the station?" he asked. "How different our lives might have been if I hadn't been sent to meet Caroline Abernathy's train." Deanna smiled up at him. "I've thought about it many times. It seemed like the lowest point of my life, alone, afraid with nowhere to go. And then you appeared and told me I was already home." She placed her hand over his. "I didn't believe you then, but you were right." He bent to kiss her, a gentle touch full of the love that had grown between them over the years. "Best words I ever spoke," he murmured against her lips, "because they brought me you." 2 weeks later, on a night when the first snow of winter was falling softly outside, Deanna gave birth to their third child, a boy they named James Augusta Nash, honoring both Damon's father and Mrs. Abernathy. Mrs. Abernathy, serving as midwife once again despite Damon's concerns about her age, was the first to pronounce him perfect in every way. as Deanna held her newborn son, with Damon sitting beside her on the bed and their older children peering curiously at their new brother. She felt a profound sense of contentment. From the window of their bedroom, she could see the lights of the main house glowing through the falling snow, a beacon of warmth in the winter night. "Welcome home, James," she whispered to the infant. "You are already home." The years continued to flow, bringing changes both expected and unforeseen. The railroad expanded its reach, bringing new opportunities for Silverhoof's cattle business. Thomas and Emily grew into capable young people who loved the ranch as much as their parents did. James, the youngest, showed an unexpected aptitude for figures and became Deanna's right hand in managing the ranch's accounts as he grew older. Mrs. Abernathy remained a vital presence at Silverhoof well into her 80s, defying the doctor's continued predictions about her health. She mellowed somewhat with age, though she never lost her forthright manner or her ability to cut to the heart of any matter with a few well-chosen words. It was in the fall of 1890, as Silverhoof celebrated one of its most prosperous years, that Mrs. Abernathy finally slipped away peacefully in her sleep, having lived to see Thomas reach 18 and begin to take on more responsibility at the ranch. The entire county turned out for her funeral, a testament to the respect she had earned over decades of fair dealing and community involvement. "She wasn't my blood," Deanna said to Damon as they stood by the grave after the others had departed, "but she was the mother of my heart." Damon nodded, his own grief evident in the lines of his face. "And the closest thing to a mother I had after my own passed. She gave us everything." "Not everything," Deanna corrected gently. "She gave us a foundation. We built on it together." As they walked arm in arm back to their home, the original cabin now expanded into a comfortable house for their family. Deanna thought about the frightened young woman she had been, crying on the cold station steps all those years ago. How far she had come from that moment of despair, guided by love and the unexpected kindness of strangers who became family. Silverhoof Ranch continued to thrive under the Nash family stewardship. Thomas eventually married Sarah, the young woman who had helped with the household chores for years, and they built their own home on the ranch property. Emily, much to everyone's surprise, developed an interest in medicine after helping care for an injured ranch hand. With her parents' blessing, she attended medical school in Denver, returning to Silverton as the town's first female doctor. James, the youngest, combined his mother's head for business with his father's love of the land, introducing innovative practices that further increased Silverhoof's prosperity. Deanna and Damon, watching their children forge their own paths while remaining connected to the ranch that had nurtured them, found their love deepening with each passing year. The silver that gradually appeared in their hair and the lines that time etched on their faces were badges of a life well lived, rich with purpose and affection. On cold winter evenings, they still sometimes sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge over the mountains that had become the backdrop to their love story. And occasionally, Damon would turn to Deanna and say softly, "You're already home," making her smile at the memory of those words that had changed her life on a bitter January night at Silverton Station in 1876. In those moments, Deanna would lean her head against her husband's shoulder and whisper back, "Yes, I am. I truly am."